to begin.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar today. This is the second webinar that we've done at Wright Specialty in the past 60 days concerning school-related risk and campus-related risk. Vince Piazza, who's also on the line with us, in addition to being our Director of Security, he's also a retired supervisory agent from the FBI, and Vince was the head of security for HBC Bank prior to coming to Wright. Vince also is suffering from some type of a cold, and his voice is scratchier and more hoarser than it usually is. So I hope he can get the message across. We also want to apologize for any off-mic chatter that you might have heard about 10 minutes ago. So what are we trying to accomplish today? Go ahead, Justine.
Oh, also, guys, if you guys have any questions throughout, we're going to be taking them regardless. Just send them through the chat button, and we'll take your questions then.
Okay, so what are we trying to accomplish today? First of all, we're going to be looking at the findings from different official reports concerning the Virginia Tech and the Sandy Hook shootings. We're also going to review the findings of the Safe Schools Initiative. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but if you don't have the documents, which contains the findings and some risk assessment recommendations from the Safe Schools Initiative, you certainly should get them. They're free, and you can obtain them through the web. We're also going to look at some of the best practices for preventing active shooter events and improving school security overall. And we stress the fact that these are best practices. They certainly don't work for everyone, but we believe that they are practical in nature and also low cost. And then lastly, we'll address any questions that you folks might be able to put forward. Just keep in mind that as a Wright Specialty insured, you have access to our risk control specialist who can help you with security and threat assessments and with school security planning in general, and you can access us. Best way would be through your individual insurance broker or representative. So I like this quote that I came across a while ago because I think it certainly applies to this issue. We recognize that determining the best way to prevent school-related violence, including the threat of an active shooter, is a very complex and a very, very serious issue. Many well-intended, caring, and quite frankly, anxious people can honestly disagree on the best way to address this exposure. We believe this is a local decision-based process based on the level of risk within your own individual school communities. We also understand that there's reputation risk involved. We understand that school communities are very concerned about this. However, from our experience, it seems that the degree of interest in school security ebbs and flows with the amount of school violence and other related events that occur in society. So you can imagine that after Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, after the Boston Marathon bombing, we received a great amount of interest from our members, many phone calls and emails for assistance in putting things together, and just an overall increase in the level of interest in this type of event and risk. Okay, so first of all, how violent are schools? What is the school-related risk, school violence-related risk? In other words, how safe are schools? Apparently very. Less than 2% of all youth homicides occur at schools. The odds that a child would die in a school by homicide or suicide are no greater than 1 in 1 million. And most active shooter events occur in businesses, in the community, and not in schools. And you can see the percentages there versus 29%. I think overall, schools are still a very safe place for students and staff. And for some students, school is the safest and most secure environment in their daily lives. This slide also demonstrates how infrequent violent-related deaths occur at school. We recognize the fact that this report does not include the 26 Sandy Hook shooting victims. Was put together in early of 2012, but even if it did, the percentages would not have changed by that much. Okay, so here's some misinformation about school shootings, and the citation for that is on the bottom. school violence is epidemic. No, it's not. Statistics show that that's not the case. All school shooters are alike. That's not so. Adam Lanza, being compared with Dylan and Klebold, who were the Columbine shooters, were very different people with very different life experiences. The school shooter is always a loner. School shootings are exclusively revenge motivated, and easy access to weapons is the most significant factor. And I would disagree with that. That's certainly not the case. It's unlikely overall that there is just one reason for a school shooting. It's a multi-cause crime. Teenagers and young adults kill because of mental illness, fascination with weapons, a toxic home life, obsession with and becoming desensitized to violence, bullying, and then retaliation. Vince, anything you want to add to the slide?
Bob, excuse my voice, folks. As Bob mentioned before, I'm dealing with a bit of a throat issue. I might sound like a frog, but hopefully I don't resemble one. But Bob, agree with everything you said. And on the bottom of that slide, the individual who authored an article regarding the threat assessment perspective was Mary O'Toole. Mary and I worked together in the critical incident branch of the Bureau, and she did a lot of research on all those findings, and they are true. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. The next slide here also goes further to define what this problem is. So, almost all of the attackers were current or former students at the school in question. The attackers were all males. 85% were between 13 and 18 years of age. 70% felt persecuted, bullied, threatened. They were attacked or injured by others. And most attackers have no history of prior violent or criminal behavior. Okay, so here's the first report we're going to look at, and Vince and I will kind of share this together. These are the key findings regarding the Virginia Tech shooting, and these are state and local recommendations. This is the report to the President on issues raised by the Virginia Tech tragedy, and this was published in 2007. So, Vin, you want to go through some of these?
I'd be happy to, Bob. The first point that's made on the findings regarding the Virginia Tech shootings were also integrated with the Secret Service initiative that we will discuss later. It talks about every school partnering up with your community partners and putting together an all-hazards emergency plan. This is extremely important for all schools, whether it's in the public and private sector, specialty school, etc. You need to have your partners, your community partners, together with you and integrating a practical and logical plan to handle all types of emergencies. The second point that we make on this slide is practicing emergency response plans and revising them as circumstances change. Very, very important. Whether you train desktop exercises or actual exercises in your schools on weekends, on holidays, etc., it's always important to practice as much as you can. What we found on our visits to these schools throughout the United States is everybody's very familiar with fire alarm drills, and they become mundane and boring. Emergency response plans and the practice of those ideas, lockdown exercises are extremely important. Again, communication with the first responders and your community partners is a necessity. Bob?
Yep. I just want to note that on the third point, we recognize that there is some controversy about sharing emergency management plans with the community. There are folks, including people on the law enforcement side, who believe that people with bad intentions will use those plans to plot attacks, and I think that is certainly a valid point. So maybe what we should say here is that you would want to communicate your emergency management plans to the community after review by whatever committee or group of people are assessing your plans. I think it's also true to say, and I think we would all agree, that these 3 points certainly prevented further death and injuries at the Sandy Hook shooting in December of 2012.
Bob, excellent point, Bob. And a lot of the schools and colleges that we see in America have their emergency plans on the internet. That might not be a great idea. You need to keep that in-house, and there's ways that you can secure that plan with your community partners so it does not get outside the purview of who needs to see it.
Vince, why don't you take the couple of the points on this slide?
Okay. Again, we talk about a lot of issues regarding what happened after the Virginia Tech shooting, as well as Sandy Hook, and it all started with the Columbine massacre back in 1999. And obviously, everyone needs to complete not only an emergency response plan, but a communication plan that is used specifically to your school. Everybody doesn't live in the same surroundings, as we all know. Some are rural areas, some are urban areas, etc. So the communication plan needs to fit your community. Technology is great, but technology is also expensive. We have discussed with a lot of our schools a lot of different ideas, a lot of best practices when it comes to that. One of the most interesting and common is an anonymous 800 telephone number that a lot of schools and colleges use to gain information on what could be happening that they are not aware of. And that is one of the least expensive ideas. And then obviously, depending on the budgets of each of the schools, you can obviously go way up on the budget scale on the technology side. On the higher education side, we've seen a lot of college campuses start, create, train their campus police departments. Very critical. From the campus police department on a monthly basis, and it works very, very well.
You just cut out a little bit, Vince. Can you just repeat some of what you were saying?
Oh, I'm sorry. We've seen one of the schools that I have visited. In fact, two of the schools. One is in Oklahoma, and one is in Pennsylvania. University of Pittsburgh has an excellent campus police department, as well as Oklahoma State University. And they update their students and staff with a lot of information that is relative to that community on a monthly basis. And there's a excellent communication between both students, campus police, etc. And they also do a lot of joint training with state police, local police, etc., which is always something that needs to be done. The last point is long-term mental health support. That is a necessity when you start your emergency critical incident response team. You need to have somebody from the mental health side on that team, whether it's a local hospital, whether it's a immediate care facility, etc. That is a necessity these days, and was a big part of the overall report from Virginia Tech. Bob?
Thanks. Yep, and just a couple of other points I'd like to make here. Although most people listening in on this webinar are from the K-12 community, the recommendation about enhancing the professionalism of campus police also applies to K-12 security guards. States around the country vary on the training requirements for school security staff, but regardless, all training should be tailored to your individual risk, your population, and your concerns. And concerning number 6, there have been many grassroots mental health programs that came about after these type of tragic events. Some developed from local hospitals, university medical schools, and then just local healthcare professionals working out of different clinics. One good example concerns a local New York college, St. John's University. On 9/11/01, St. John's had a campus, a satellite campus, literally 2 or 3 blocks from the World Trade Center site. After that, they launched a treatment program for children who attended the school and witnessed the events of 9/11/01 and were forced to evacuate during the event. So this program that started in 2002 is now involved into a large program that treats children who have gone through different types of crisis. Okay. Did you catch ahead? Are we one slide ahead? I think we should be here.
Yeah, I think we need to go back a little bit. Yes.
Here it is. Okay, so from the New York Center for School Safety, here are 7 characteristics that they have published of promising school violence prevention programs. And again, these are practical. There's not a large cost involved with most of them. So first, as we've talked about it, I'm sure you've heard this from other people that speak on this topic, there's a need for a comprehensive approach. Many of the techniques that you would put into play because of an active shooter or an armed intruder would also come into play for other types of emergency management plans. You need an early start and a long-term commitment. As I mentioned before, interest in this subject really ebbs and flows based on what is happening in society. You need strong leadership, and you do need disciplinary policies. Sometimes the leaders that are in place for other programs are not the appropriate people that need to run this type of a program. There's a need for staff development, meaning staff training. We do certainly recommend and go along with the center's recommendation for parental involvement. Vin, why don't you just kind of touch on number 6 a little bit?
Yes, again, we go back to partnerships and your community. It's absolutely essential to have interagency partnerships. Bob and I have visited schools within the United States, and I can think of one right off the bat, which was in neighboring Westchester County, New York. When we talked to the administrators, we immediately asked them what is their relationship with their local police department. And the silence on the other end of the conversation was very frightening. They had none. They were trying to hire individual security people when, in fact, they really probably didn't have to, because they had a very personal and very up-to-date police department that they needed to partner with. For whatever reason, they did not choose to do so. And we tried to explain to them that would be the first responders to any issue that they would have. Again, community linkages, Bob mentioned it before, on the medical side, on the mental health side, that is essential with all of these prevention programs.
Now, we also recognize that in some communities there isn't an easy partnership between, let's say, law enforcement, first responders, local municipal emergency management staff. But I think we can recognize from the Sandy Hook shooting that those police officers, both Connecticut State Police and local, were familiar with the school and they were familiar with the layout of the building. Many law enforcement agencies right now have the ability to download blueprints on their computers. They have the ability to download contact information. So at a minimum, if there is some type of local reason why there isn't a partnership between these different communities, it would be wise to look for someone who could possibly bring people together on it.
Bob, I'd just like to mention, Bob, okay, if I could, just to jump in 1 minute, another community partner that we've used on occasion for fire drills that I mentioned before is your fire departments. especially in the K through 12 situations. I did a walkthrough one time with the Department of Homeland Security, and they invited the local fire department to come in with their fire department uniforms on and walk together with the local police department. It put the children so much at ease that at the next parent meeting, the parents were telling the staff of the school how comfortable their children were, that they saw the fire department with the police department versus just having a police officer there alone. They felt that with the fire department together as a community partner, it made them feel much more comfortable. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, and the last point here I think is sort of self-explanatory. The materials, the activities, and the training really needs to be based. It needs to be culturally sensitive. It needs to be developmentally appropriate based on the population that you're working with. Certainly, if you have a bilingual or trilingual community, you want this information to be in different languages. Okay, so again, looking back at the Sandy Hook shooting, what are some lessons learned from that? First, there was a strong commitment to safety and security. Vin, any thoughts on that?
Yes. When you read the report, and I've talked to many colleagues from federal, local, and state departments that responded to that terrible tragedy, this school had done training. They knew what to do to protect themselves, lockdown, lockout procedures. They did have a strong commitment to safety and security. Unfortunately, Adam Lanza shot his way into that school. I don't have to go through any details what that actually means, but when you face a situation like that, there's only so much that you can protect yourself. When someone has automatic weapons and has a mission to get into your school or into your business. We've seen that, as Bob mentioned before, on the workplace violence side of the house, in business. Again, we need to understand and protect ourselves and do as much prevention as we can. But when a situation develops like a Sandy Hook, like a Columbine, unless you have the police and SRO at your school, you're at the mercy of these individuals.
And to pick up a little bit on the second bullet here, what I find encouraging, maybe somewhat enlightening, was the fact that there were individual staff people in Sandy Hook on that day, and I would probably mention one or two of the classroom teachers, and I believe one of the custodians, who really went beyond their training to protect students and staff. They used innovative methods. They used, I guess, seat of the pants efforts that came about during the midst of that crisis. And you wonder how much of that was motivated, if the foundation came out of training, or were they just a school that had some very well-trained, very dedicated staff there? Robocalls. Go ahead.
I totally agree with you, Bob. And when you mention those teachers that gave their lives to protect those young students, I think you hit it right on the head. Some of it comes from training, and some of it comes from basic common sense and what you need to do at a situation like that. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks. The last point here was the very effective use of robocalls and emails that were sent out to the community, and they were also coordinated with local and state law enforcement. There is some controversy about the use of robocalls and broadcast emails. Some people feel that it can create a panic. It could result in, understandably, a large number of people showing up at the site. It could put information out for people that have bad intentions. But I think overall, good news or bad, the community needs to be kept abreast as to what exactly is going on. If the robocall and email information contains things like the campus is shut down at this point, there is a meeting place for parents at this location or several different locations. If the robocalls contain information such as there is law enforcement on the scene, there's emergency management responders on the scene, it provides some level of comfort or some level of security to the people who are getting the information.
And again, I go back to the point of training with your community partners, folks. Part of that training would be the use of these emails and the robocalls so that all parties get the right plan in effect so that they don't put too much out there or not enough. And we saw that during the Virginia Tech situation. There was a lot of information in that report stating the fact that there wasn't a lot of information coming out of Virginia Tech to the students and or the outside community partners. And obviously, when you train together and you work a plan together, those two situations could be resolved.
And the other thing about the robocalls and the emails, this is information that you're controlling. So people hopefully are getting information first directly from your school or from the law enforcement agencies that are working, and they're not getting information from the media. And sometimes the official information that you put out can display some of the rumors that might be circling in the community. On this page here, there are some other lessons that we feel are to be learned from Sandy Hook. The first 2 points deal with actions that were taken after the event to protect and help the affected members of the Sandy Hook community. One of the reasons this worked was because of the coordinated effort by school administrators, governmental officials, mental health professionals, and law enforcement. One point that was not mentioned was the effective way in which the community dealt with and managed the media. What appeared to have happened early on was that the responsibility to work with the media and to control the message was given to a very good spokesman, Lieutenant Vance, from the Connecticut State Police. He really followed the workbook and the checklist on how to work with the media. He gave frequent updates to representatives of the media and the community in the early days of the investigation. He stated what he knew, he stated what he did not know, and he also indicated what questions he would not be able to answer. So that's another thing that I think you folks should work into your emergency management plan, and that's really who controls the message, who speaks to the media, and who's going to be the front person or the spokesperson for the school and also for the community. Sometimes it's best not to use an administrator or a representative of the school, and sometimes it's best either to, if it can be done, giving it to law enforcement to work with, giving it to a local municipal emergency management official, or if your school has a media management person that you work with, that's a good time to bring them in. This covers the report by the Judicial District of Danbury on the Sandy Hook shootings. This is really the law enforcement's report. This report is an excellent law enforcement document. It doesn't really contain recommendations so much for the school community, but here are some of the major points that came out of that. As we know, and as Vince had mentioned, a heavily armed Adam Lanza shot his way into the school building. If you've seen any of the pictures that are in the media showing his entry point, he literally shot his way through a pretty thick plain glass window, went in, and just went about his horrible business. He shot and killed 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School. There's no clear indication why Sandy Hook was chosen. There are some different theories on it. Lanza very carefully planned his actions over time, and there has been no motive established for the event. One thing that Lanza didn't do was to communicate his plans with anyone else in the community. Law enforcement officials often mention that in many shootings, the shooter or the shooters tell others or warn others about the upcoming event. Vin, any comments on this? Okay.
Included in some of our information that we gave. It's called stoptheshooting.org, and they have a brief regarding the Sandy Hook shooting, and I think it really puts it all in perspective. As Bob mentioned, there were 26 people that lost their lives, including 20 first-grade children and teachers. He came in at approximately 9:40 a.m., and the shooting took place within a few minutes. The witnesses who did survive the shooting advised that the shooter did not say one word. The shooting, after the shooting occurred, or before the shooting occurred, at his nearby residence, he did kill his mother, as we all know from reading the media stories. And again, like in many of these situations, Lanza died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
All right, here are the implications of the Safe Schools Initiative, and there's a link to the website, I think, on one of the pages at the back of the handout. So we'll kind of run through these. First is that incidents of targeted school violence at school are rarely are sudden impulsive acts. What that means is that, I guess, within the shooter's home, within their living environment, there's going to be evidence that this is being put together. Prior to most incidents, other people knew about the attacker's idea or plans. The information rarely made its way or found its way to an adult. In some of the instances, the evidence points to the fact that the shooters told a limited number of people, maybe one or two, that they knew, that they were friends with, that they were maybe trying to protect, things along the lines of warnings that said, don't go to school tomorrow. Don't be in the cafeteria during second period. Stay away from the main entrance. Number 3, most attackers do not threaten their targets directly prior to advancing the attack. Number 4, there is no accurate or useful profile of students who engage in targeted school violence. There are some common characteristics that we talked about before, but in many cases, the shooters are very different people. Number 5, most attackers engaged in some behavior prior to the incident that caused others concern, and if you read any of the reports or even the media reports concerning Adam Lanza, you recognize the fact that he was in his room communicating with his mother through email only. He had taped black bags over his windows, and I think for most people that may have been an indication of some problems down the road. Okay, then why don't you take, on this next slide, why don't you take the first 3?
Thanks, Bob. Number 6, most attackers had difficulty coping with significant losses or personal failures. Many attempted suicide. Very true. We saw it in the Virginia Tech individual. We did see it in the Columbine teenagers, and obviously the most recent, Adam Lanza. Some will never know the reason why. Others, based on the Virginia Tech report, there was a lot of indication that Cho had some mental and emotional problems dating back to elementary school. Many attackers also, as point 7 makes, felt bullied, persecuted, or injured by others prior to the attack. Just as a point, and it's not mentioned on any of these statistics, but one of the worst tragedies that we've seen dates back to 1927, the Bath School in Michigan, where an individual who was upset because he lost an election and his wife was dying of cancer decided to blow his house up as well as the school that was right next to the house. And it was based mainly on him feeling persecuted or injured by second or third parties. So it has continued. Point 8, most attackers had access to and had used weapons. Not only weapons, but explosive devices. In the Columbine case, these 2 young men had plans to detonate explosives outside the school to sort of have the responding police officers respond to those explosives before they actually got to the school. So there was a lot of planning in that regard. Adam Lanza's parent, at least one of them, gave him the opportunity to train with firearms. There was a lot of firearms at the parents' residence. Again, point 9, some other students obviously become aware of what's going on with a fellow student based on the bullying that goes on and based on the constant contact. It could be someone within your school property, like a custodian or the nurse or another teacher, who's seeing something that's going on with this student that might be of interest to bring up to the critical incident team. Again, as we mentioned before, one of the big points of the Safe School initiatives is to try and put together a critical incident team, an emergency response team within your school that can address these issues before they develop. And the last point, most attackers were stopped by means other than law enforcement, and they were brief in duration. In the case of Adam Lanza, witnesses told us that once the fire departments and the police departments were on their way to respond to the school, that's when he decided to commit suicide. Obviously, he wasn't intent on taking on law enforcement when he got there.
Okay.
Other situations, we've seen that other teachers are able to converse with students, and these students sometimes listen and put down their weapons, even before police response is there.
Vince, we have a question. We have a question from one of the attendees.
Sure.
Don would like to know if there's any relationship between the use of social media by the shooters.
I didn't hear that, the last part of that.
Don would like to know if there is any relationship between the use of social media by the shooters.
Well, you know, there's a big study that the Secret Service has done which talks about a lot of different media outlets that affect some of these people who are going to commit these heinous crimes. Social media is one of the newest media parts that we use, and I don't think we have any specific knowledge of social media having direct access at this point, but we know the use of violent films, Game Boys, etc., that we've seen has been found during the investigations by the Secret Service and the FBI, which could have been a cause in why these attacks were brought on. But I can't give you any specifics on recent social media.
And one other point to Don's question, if you remember, Adam Lanza destroyed the hard drive on his computer or computers, and apparently even with all the resources of state and federal law enforcement and forensic computer engineers, they have not been able to really get any information out of that, which would lead, I think, most of us to believe that there was something on that hard drive or several things on the hard drive that Adam Lanza did not want revealed even after his death. What Vince had mentioned is certainly true. Much of the research supports the idea that many of these shooters have an obsession with violence. In the Danbury state attorney's report on Sandy Hook, there's a list of the violent programs that this person was watching and was engaged in. Whether or not they use social media to transmit their message, let's say, I don't know, or I don't believe so. I know that Chow, the person who was involved with the Virginia Tech shooting, did leave some information behind, but I'm not sure whether or not, I don't recall if any of it was posted on social media. And just one point on number 10, I believe that in terms of the method that the shooters were stopped in, other than law enforcement, in most cases was suicide. Sometimes they'll give up and they'll be apprehended, but in many cases it is their intention to commit suicide at the end. This report is a relatively recent report. It was done by the Idaho State Insurance Department. And what they did was they did a K-12 security assessment. They went out and looked at, I believe, 74 schools around the state. And the results are kind of shocking, but maybe not all that surprising. In 71 of the 74 schools, unauthorized access was obtained in other than the designated main entrance. And from our experience in doing security assessments at schools around the country, and even just doing plain loss control inspections, I'm guessing that that's probably going to be rooms around the kitchen, around loading docks, or side entrances that are deliberately kept unlocked, which gives staff and students the ability to get into a building without having to walk around the perimeter of the building or into another location. In 66 of these schools, there were multiple points of ingress. The average time an assessor was in a building before being contacted was under 10 minutes. In 19 cases, the assessor was never even contacted. And the designated points of entry were monitored, or monitored meaning by camera, electronically, or with a security guard, or with people, let's say, in a main office or receptionist who had visual observation of the entrance in only 27 of the 74 schools that were visited. I know from personal experience that if you're wearing a suit and tie and you're carrying a clipboard, it'll usually take a while before anyone would bother stopping and asking you if they can help you.
And Bob, at this point, I'd like to bring up a little experience that I used with my security team at HSBC Bank, which brings up the point of multiple points of egress and what's called a greeter management system. We, at one point in the bank, were the highest bank for bank robberies in the city of New York. When I took over the position as director of security, we did an assessment, and the first thing we decided to do was put a greeter at every single one of our branches, so that as soon as anybody came through that front door, they would see themselves on a monitor that we had, very cheap way to hook it up with our technical people. Same thing can be done at school, and that person would greet anybody that came through that door and said, "How are you today? What's going on? What can I do for you?" And we were trying to eliminate the bad guys from coming in to do our bank robberies. And it did a substantial amount. We had a substantial amount of success with that. We can move that along to the K-12 and the university area. If you have a single point of entry, it's always a good idea and essential to have a greeter and a visitor management program. And it's not something that's that expensive, but it works as a prevention mechanism. Bob?
Okay. This next slide here is just some of the questions that come about. I would offer in your minds questions we've gotten from our insureds and policyholders, questions that are put forth in the media, issues that school administrators are struggling with. So the next part of this presentation is really for us to present what we consider to be some practical, low-cost security measures that could be put into play, they can be put into effect without a great deal of effort and expense. Vince talked about the first one, about stopping and evaluating all visitors before they enter the school. We recognize that this is a difficult position. Certainly the person is not there to be a security guard necessarily. They're not there to take someone down. They're not there to challenge someone. In the case of the Sandy Hook shooting, I really don't know what this person could have done except perhaps sounded the alarm earlier, got the 911 call in quicker, put the building on lockdown a little bit earlier. But the idea about greeting someone at the front door, I think, is a great idea. If you remember some of the statistics we gave at the beginning of the presentation, the active shooter event, armed intruders, school violence, school-related homicides are really infrequent, very infrequent. What happens more often in schools are people that have custody issues, people with orders of protection, parents that have issues with teachers, parents that have issues with maybe gang-related violence. somebody stopping someone at the front door and asking them if they could help them, I would argue that in some of the cases involving people that are just angry, maybe out of control, not necessarily armed, are there to make a statement. Maybe being greeted at the front door may diffuse some of that, may prevent it, may turn people away. We love the idea about badging people. If the private sector badges people that are just going to a bank or an office building to meet with someone, why shouldn't we be doing this in a school environment? I love the idea about escorting visitors to their destination and then escorting them back. A while ago, I went to visit a school, and I was walked from the front door into an administrator's office, and then the administrative assistant walked me back, and I asked them why, and they said, look, if we badge you and sign you in and give you directions to go down the hall about 100 feet and make a left and a right, we have no idea whether or not you're going there, you're going someplace else, or you have some other idea. I like the idea about conducting walks around the school building during the day. It kind of identifies who's in the school perimeter, helps identify people that might be parked illegally, if there's loiterers, if there are people that are acting suspiciously. This could be a custodial person, a buildings and grounds individual, could be security, could be a school administrator. It doesn't necessarily mean that this person is going to confront them. It just means that they've identified a situation that needs to be explored. With cell phones, it's kind of easy to do what we're asking for in number 5, but giving people mobile devices like two-way radios is good. A hardwired communication system between classrooms and the main office is also a good idea, but supplementing it in some other way allows people to communicate both outside the building and within the building. So if there are people that got out of a building during a crisis and there's people that are in lockdown inside, there's an opportunity for them to communicate. And they'll be communicating with the people that they've been trained to communicate with. I think Vince and I have mentioned several times the need to bring police and first responders to the school. Let them know the layout of the building. Let them know where your housing or where your secure locations are within a school. And this doesn't apply just to armed shooters or active shooters. This could also apply in a situation involving weather or a tornado or severe windstorm where first responders are going to know where the people have been taken to be protected. Recognize and enforce orders of protection and custody agreements. Another point I'd like to make there is that we've been involved in a number of civil liability claims where a school had a policy and procedure where greeters would be met at the door. There'd be a phone call made to confirm that they have an appointment, and then they would be escorted down to their destination point. In one or two of these situations, an irate parent who had been given access to staff without being challenged, probably because this person was a forceful individual. In one case, he got into the school after hours, wasn't challenged, went into a classroom and physically assaulted 2 teachers who he believed were persecuting his son, not giving him the right type of education, not going through with his individual assessment plan. That's a case that we're not going to do well with. And then lastly, train, on this slide, train and drill regularly. Justine, next slide. It's a good idea to review your emergency action plans. Make sure they include a go-to or rally point for staff and students, where if you are evacuating a building during a crisis, where the teachers know where to take the students and the staff. In addition, threats change. Risk changes over time. The building next door that might have been a church or a community session, a community place, or maybe a private office building or a vacant piece of property where you could take your students to doesn't exist anymore. Now it's a different type of location. Maybe the owners of that building or of that particular piece of property don't want students evacuating there. So as time goes on, you need to change your plans. And then lastly, make sure that your mass communication systems are working, and if you're promising people that you'll be posting information on Facebook or if they're following you on Twitter, that those devices are working properly. What influences school security programs? As I said before, every community, every school has a different risk profile. They have a different appetite towards school security. We see clients where, you could walk in, say hello, and go about your business, and when you ask about that, they'll tell you that they do not want to, they don't want to present a threatening, in their words, school to the community. They want to keep it open and welcoming. That's their decision. On the other hand, we've been in school buildings where you are greeted by a uniformed security officer. You sign in, you leave your driver's license in some cases, or it's scanned, your badge, and you're escorted before you go any further. So what are the influencing factors? State regulations, the appetite or the philosophy of the community, certainly your budget, what assets you have available, the extent or level of commitment from people, and then certainly any prior incidents that might have occurred. Prior incidents are certainly a good indication of where your vulnerabilities might be and what you might need to do going forward. We do, yes, recognize that it's a local decision. Okay. Vin, you want to talk about some of the concerns that you have as former law enforcement, as somebody who is still active in the law enforcement community?
Yes, thank you, Bob. When people ask Bob, myself, and Bob's staff about armed security guards, teachers being armed, etc., we try to go back to a basic idea of the school resource officers. They have been a proven commodity for many years. The state of New York, for example, had in their budget for a long time state troopers that were assigned specifically throughout the state for security at schools. They would be at middle schools, elementary schools, high schools. They would make their day totally around the school. And they would be there to respond to any and all situations. And Bob and I have a famous saying, let the professionals do their job. And I think that's the easiest way to categorize this. We've seen some schools up in Western New York where they hire a director of security. That director of security may be an emergency management person. Doesn't necessarily have to be a law enforcement person. Could be a retired fireman, a retired emergency management person. That person would be coordinating with his community partners. The school may or may not decide to have other security guards in the staff, depending on the budget, and that has worked. Again, armed volunteers, again, is something that is specific to where you live. What happens in South Dakota is not relevant in New York, and vice versa. I can bring up an instance that we might have discussed previously regarding response time. If you live in a very rural area, as Bob mentioned before, where the local police department's response time is going to be 30 minutes, 20 minutes, etc., we did a little brainstorming with the community partners and found that there was a correctional facility right near the school. And once we identified that facility as a partner, we were able to have them involved with training and a much better response as a first responder. Again, open campus buildings, more attuned to the campus, the university situation. It is an open question. It's always a problem. That's why, what we mentioned before, the use of a dedicated and relevant campus police agency is always the best way to go. After school activities, again, we come back to the SROs. If you are able to engage in getting the necessary political pressure in your local or municipal area where you can get a school resource officer, after school activities need to be covered by the SROs also. It is a very important part of the daily activity in the school, as everybody knows. The role of parents are very important. They're very obviously concerned about the safety of their children, and they will do absolutely anything to protect them, to the point of demanding armed teachers and armed security. That's an individual decision. You really have to drill down on it before you take that route. But personally, professionally, as I mentioned earlier, I believe the SROs is the way to go, and to let the local state law enforcement agency do their jobs for you. Bob?
Yep, thank you. We think there is some vulnerability with after-school activities. We don't necessarily mean, varsity basketball, football, baseball, or soccer games. We mean that many times at the end of the school day, the security people leave. There aren't as many people monitoring the entrance, and we think that at that time of the day there could be a good number of students and other people in the building, and that's one area that we like to ask about when we go out and do assessments. So what are we not discussing? Some controversial issues. How much parental buy-in do we need, and how do we get it? There's an issue, and it continues to be a discussion, about the sharing of mental health information. And then also mental health screening and how to identify, how to help, how to assist troubled students that might display some of this behavior that we've been mentioning throughout. The last slide here contains some of the links to the various sources that we use to put this together. The U.S. Secret Service link at the bottom will take you to the Safe Schools Initiative. Some of the slides in this presentation were done at a prior presentation we did in North Dakota last year at this time. That's why you see those emblems off to the side. I want to thank those groups again for putting us together. This presentation here was done for all our members across the country. If you have questions, again, you could work through your broker. If you'd like to access one of the risk control people here at Wright Specialty. And Justine, if anybody has questions.
Yes, please. If any of you guys have questions out there, I am going to now, I know the chat button can be a little intimidating, so I'm going to unmute all attendees. And if anybody would like to speak, you are more than welcome to. We're going to stay on for another 2 minutes. I also want to let you guys know that the presentation as well as this recorded webinar will be available on our website for anyone that missed it. There'll be a follow-up email that will include the link to this webinar, and if you would like the presentation, there will be a link in there as well. Any questions at all? Okay, we have a question. Vince, are you still there?
Yes.
Great. All right. So we have a question from David. He wants to know, what about active shooter programs that give options versus just lockdown?
The active shooter program is, again, a program that's used by the locality as well as the municipality, depending on how your state defines the active shooter program is how you're going to train. The Department of Homeland Security uses a different active shooter program than, let's say, the state of California. So it all depends on where you are living, and your protocol and your procedure is how your law enforcement agency is going to train on active shooter. We can go all the way back to 1999 on the Columbine shooting, before we had active shooter training, where there was a police officer assigned to that Columbine high school, but at that point they were not trained or taught to immediately respond to an active shooter. Now that, of course, has changed.
So lockdown, so what would you say versus the active shooter program versus the lockdown?
Well, it's part of the whole process. Justine, active shooter, lockdown, lockout, it's all part of one process and how you train. And that's how pretty much it works.
And also one quick comment too. I mean, certainly if you have students out at recess, out at lunch on the playground, and there's a situation developing at the front of the school, you would not lock those kids down. You would certainly evacuate them and take them to a rally point.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you on our next webinar next month. And again, this will be recorded and it will be sent out to all of you after. Thank you.